members, Maine Dairy Task Force members, and also additional individuals who we did some targeted outreach to because of your affiliation with particular programs that we think are extremely relevant to this conversation. So I just wanted to thank you. I know that there are some public members on the line as well, and we really appreciate your ongoing listening in and offering public comments, and we'll make sure that we provide an opportunity for that as well. I thought it might make sense to go around and I'll start by introducing myself and then having the task force members introduce themselves, and then I'll call out the organizations and the individuals who we were really explicit in trying to invite into this conversation. So we all know who's here. I'm Jody Sapphire. Nice to meet many of you for the first time. I serve as Special Assistant to Commissioner Beal in the Commissioner's Office at the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And I've been facilitating the Maine Dairy Task Force, the meetings that have been happening since June, July, now I'm forgetting, June, I think. Meeting once a month with an objective of providing to the legislature a concise list of recommendations on how to support Maine's dairy industry by January 6th is our deadline. So let me, before I provide additional introduction, let me pass it over to task force members and start just by how I'm seeing you all on the screen with Ethan Robertson.
Hi there, I'm Ethan Robertson. I work at Farm Credit East as a dairy business consultant, and I'm on the task force sort of helping fill in the economist role.
Great, thank you. Julie Marie.
I'm Julie Marie Bickford. I'm currently the executive director of the Milk Commission, and that's the role that I'm filling on the task force. I also ran the Dairy Farmer Trade Association for 20 years prior to this role.
Thank you. And Heath Miller.
Good morning, Heath Miller, dairy farmer from Newburgh, representing the task force, representing on the task force tier 3.
Thank you. Miriam, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, my name is Miriam Talib. I work at DCF and I've been helping facilitate and organize these meetings.
Okay, thanks. We will likely have Bill Eldridge, who is a consultant. Some of you, or perhaps all of you, know him previously with his affiliation with Moo Milk. And he may join us, and Commissioner Beal may be able to call in a bit. So as I understand it, there was outreach done to try to pull in representation from R&D. So Morgan.
Hello, my name is Morgan Hotham. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator with USDA RD.
Thanks. And then University of Maine Cooperative Extension. Dr. Pereira.
Hey, Glenna Pereira. I am the dairy specialist at the University of Maine, and I've been in this role for about 3 years, so I'm familiar with most of you, but happy to be here and support as I can.
Great, thanks for joining. CEI, Bradley.
Hi, everyone. Bradley Russell. I work with Coastal Enterprises, Inc. We are a community development finance institution in Brunswick, and I run the Sustainable Food and Agriculture program here.
Great, welcome, thank you. NRCS, Alice.
Hi, Alice Began formerly from NRCS. I'm representing NRCS, retired back in April, and I'm helping with some transition. And Tony Jenkins sent his regrets. He was double booked for today. So I'm going to sit in and at least listen and give him some notes, and I'll see how helpful I can be, but I can communicate to him anyway. So thank you.
Awesome, thank you. FSA. I'm afraid to say your name because I feel like there are two legitimate pronunciations and I'm afraid to get it wrong. So
You must be talking about me. Hi, this is Lucia Brown. I am the Farm Loan Program Chief for the Farm Service Agency. And I will pass it over to Amanda, who is also joining for Farm Service Agency today.
Good morning. I'm Amanda May, and Lucia covers the loan side of things. I cover FSA farm programs. So happy
Great.
to be here.
Awesome. Good. Thank you. And Mafka, we don't yet. We put out an invitation due to the programming that they provide, but we'll see if somebody joins from there. Let's see. We also have public members. We'll make sure that we provide an opportunity. Have I overlooked anyone that there was outreach directly made to you? Please just jump in.
Hi, I'm Ivana. I am the Business and Cooperative Program Specialist in Rural Development.
Great, thank you for joining. Well, good. We have up to 2 hours together. We will have a hard stop at noon. If we end earlier, that's fine too, but no pressure. I thought it might be helpful to give a little bit of additional backdrop, particularly for those who are new to this conversation today, just to understand what we're trying to accomplish today, between today and one additional meeting before September 19th, which we will schedule before the end of today's call. The Dairy Task Force has been meeting monthly, as I mentioned, in plenary, Commissioner Beal is going to join in a moment, just needing the link. And Tom, I believe you're taking care of that. Tom, a meeting ID and passcode are needed to get through by phone. If you wouldn't mind taking care of that, that would be really helpful. So the task force has been meeting monthly. What it decided after, I think, meeting 3 was that it would be really productive to break into subgroups for about a month and a half to tackle in more detail 3 major topic areas that the task force identified. One is focused on the tier program specifically. Another one is focused on processing infrastructure, both on farm and not on farm, how that could be financed, what the specific needs are. So that is a category unto itself. It may very well be that this conversation today bleeds into that a little bit, but I just wanted you to be aware that that is a separate conversation happening. And this one, the funding and technical assistance subgroup was identified at the last meeting in particular through a couple of avenues. One was that we had invited young farmers in particular to speak to the task force and identify barriers that they were experiencing personally on their farms, trying to enter the dairy industry, or as young farmers actively working in the industry. We also had a very broad conversation about existing funding programs, be they for technical support or infrastructure support on farms, and how those programs are useful and where some of the barriers are, where some of the gaps are affiliated with those programs. And I thought it might be helpful just to ground everybody a little bit to read a few excerpts from the notes from the last meeting, just so that you can hear what some of the conversation centered around. So when the task force was diving into kind of a review of existing in-state programs that support dairy farmers, they identified 3 major themes. And I want to thank Craig Lapine and Miriam for developing these notes that I'm pulling from that meeting. But the first theme was that the need to navigate financial and technical resources, the many resources that exist, can be a barrier due to the volume of opportunities and trying to understand what funding opportunities best suit a particular farm need. farmers mentioned that they need more support sorting through the constant stream of emails to find relevant opportunities that they might be most eligible for that would fit their needs best. There was some conversation about, might there be value in there being an office in state for coordination, resource management, financial opportunities. The group definitely identified the value of the Northeast Area Business Innovation Center, but I think also felt that some unified resource that was Maine-based could be particularly helpful. The second theme that the group identified was technical assistance in business planning and succession planning and grant writing that supports such as tax preparation, grant proposal writing were real needs that farmers had, and they lacked the capacity to always do that with all of the other demands on their time. And then the third theme was that they felt that grants were not always targeted toward the most critical needs of dairy farms, that some identified that there is a fair amount of opportunity for funding for milk storage, but not a lot associated with animal handling, such as facilities or equipment. So it was trying to identify certain gaps. The last thing I'll mention is just some highlights that young farmers in particular identified as challenges that overlap with these that I just mentioned, that transition planning and business planning support are needed, that grant applications can be themselves a barrier, that the application process often requires specialized skill development, and sometimes the eligibility requirements are too narrow. And again, keeping track of opportunities and eligibility felt like a big hurdle. So I'll stop there, and I just want to really kind of open up the conversation and hope that this is simply a dynamic conversation. Our goal here is to leave the second meeting that we will have. If we come up with some draft recommendations today, great, but we'll have an opportunity to hone them further at our second meeting. But to come up with a couple, 2, 3, whatever, recommendations that go back to the full task force that specifically address gaps that that have been identified for technical assistance or funding. And if there are specific suggestions that you have about existing Maine programs, we are all ears. Just the commissioner wanted to make sure that we were very explicit about that there was some identification of some gaps at the last meeting. Don't need to go into them, but really interested in hearing from you about that as well. So I will open it up. Maybe just because we're on screen and there's a lot of people, you could use the raise hand function and I'll just call on you immediately. And if you're a member of the public, I'll just make a note to myself to make sure that we provide an opportunity for you to weigh in as well a little bit later on in the meeting. Hard to go first. Go ahead, Ivana.
Hi, so we have the Rural Business Development Grant, and this grant in particular is open to institutions of higher education, nonprofits, or town or county governments, or really any kind of state government, and it could be used to provide technical assistance to small businesses and ag producers. So in this case, the technical assistance could be business planning and anything of that nature. But there would need to be an applicant that kind of wants to head that up. That grant opens in November and typically is due in February. And the timeline for that grant for announcements is sometime between June and August. There's a few set-asides. Those are in June, state competitions July, and then the national competitions in August.
Can you clarify 2 things? This is super helpful. Has this grant opportunity been accessed yet for this purpose in Maine? What's the history of that? And what's
For technical assistance to businesses, yes, not for dairy in particular. We're doing 2 different ones this year. That's technical assistance to aquaculture businesses is one of them, and one is to creative entrepreneurs. We've done a lot of technical assistance to aquaculture, but we've never done one for dairy.
but as it's structured right now, it could be.
Yes.
Great. And size, rough size, just to give a sense.
So that is a great question. We did not get a ton of funding for this program this year. For the state of Maine, we got 268,000 total. There's technically no max requirement for this grant. But you typically score better if you ask for under 100,000. That doesn't change. So we have a lot of like 99,999. Because there's just a scoring piece where it's under 100,000, you get more points. But on the set aside competition, so something like the social economic community development, as long as your application meets 2 regional or regional and a statewide plan, then you can apply for that set aside. There's more money there than there is in the state. So you could apply for more funding there. We've seen grants as high as 200,000 in the set aside competition. And actually the national competition, we just got those results today. So let me see. And some of those were as high as 150,000. So
Great, thank you. It's helpful. Great, others, thanks, Ivana. Miriam.
I think I just wanted to ask a quick question of the group to kind of frame our discussion of specifically technical assistance. Just that there is technical assistance available in Maine. That's why so many of you were here. I think the question for farmers in the group is sort of what's not working about the TA. Is it awareness of it? Is it that the knowledge areas that are represented aren't kind of covering all of those needs, or is there just not enough available? And then I think for those of you who are representing technical assistance providers, what do you feel like is getting in the way of being able to meet all of the needs that you know about?
Great, thank you for framing it that way. That's helpful. Thoughts that people have about that?
I would just chime in. So I think the biggest hurdle when we talk about technical assistance is in the frame that we're talking about right now. We're talking about trying to go to the legislature with an idea about how we could support dairy farmers other than maybe the tier. So last winter, the cost production study asked the legislature to fund $35 million to make farmers break even. So if we add up all the technical assistance that's available out there, I guarantee it doesn't come to anywhere near that. So how do we get technical assistance and ultimately funds to farmers to total $35 million? Because that's what they need to break even. So I think that's the biggest hurdle, is just not enough funds available. If 141 dairy farmers applied for all of it, there would be I don't know what the total would be available. If you said only Maine dairy farmers get that, I don't think we're anywhere near that 35 million. So I think that's the biggest hurdle, is there's just not enough funds available. Even if we could get every farmer to apply and get what they needed to make that farm whole, which we're not going to do anyways. We talk about business planning, and then I think about farms. It depends on where you're at in the life of that farm. I mean, generational transfer. If you're in your 60s and there is nobody coming, what good is a business plan when all you're trying to do is gather up enough money to fix everything that broke today? You can write that in the business plan. You can write in the business plan that the sun's going to shine for 200 days a year. Nothing's going to break and everything's going to go perfect, but that doesn't happen any day on a dairy farm. So I don't know. I think every dairy farm is so different that it's just, when we talk about grants and technical assistance, I don't know how we get to that every farm and make every farm whole like we're asking to do with the tier program.
Thank you, Heath. Julie Marie?
Just to piggyback on what Heath is saying, I think that's our task force mission, is to look and see what we can do to, add on to meet those goals. But there's a lot of different categories, and maybe it might be helpful if we did kind of jump through some of the categories of assistance first. And the processing subcommittee met yesterday, and we talked a great deal about the fact that there is not a lot of technical assistance out there to help farms scale up on farm processing. And there are a lot of programs out there to start people in the process, but there's not a lot of there's not an equal amount of opportunities once you're in the process. How do you keep moving your operation, your business forward? How do you keep it viable once you've, kind of started it from the very beginning? So those were a couple of things that were brought up. Also, there was talk about needing help with individual branding of folks who are going into value-added businesses, branding and marketing. That is, and all of these specific to dairy, because dairy has so many unique aspects, both in the processing and in the marketing aspects, that dairy rarely fits well in a general program.
Sure.
And I think that was all I had in my notes from yesterday's meeting, just to share that with everybody.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm certainly open to us going through category by category as we define them collectively, but let's just, and you've identified a couple of them, Julie Marie, but let me just grab, Bradley, did you have something that you wanted to address first before I move to Ivana?
I feel like I need to just keep thinking about it a little bit. So Ivana, why don't you go ahead?
Julie Marie brought up something about processing and marketing, and we have the value-added producer grant, which is mostly for processing and marketing. So the value-added producer grant is open to agricultural producers. The working capital, which is what covers, so there's two sides of the grant. There's the planning grant. So if a farm specifically wants to apply for their own feasibility study, business plan, things of that nature, they can apply for the planning grant. And then the working capital grant is up to a $250,000 grant. It is a 50-50 match, so that scares people. But that match can be the value of the raw commodity and owner and family labor. So it doesn't have to be $250,000 cash. That grant can be used for processing fees, on-farm, like processing labor or any labor after milking that is not owner or family, packaging materials, marketing fees, website development, any of, those kinds of things. And we have 5 different definitions of value added. So you don't necessarily have to be making ice cream or yogurt. If it's local food, so if you're only selling your milk between 400 miles from your farm or only within the state of Maine, is considered value added. If it's organic, that's produced in a manner, so that's organic, that's value added. Obviously, there's the change in physical state. And then another thing that some dairy farms might be able to participate in is renewable energy. So if they have any on-farm kind of biodigesters or things like that, we can help fund some of that renewable energy that's happening on the farm.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious from a farmer perspective, and this is putting you, Heath, on the spot, I guess, but are there, when you think about those opportunities that were just described, what's missing from that? Like, what are the major gaps there?
Well, I think one of the major gaps when you talk about on-farm processing, especially, is it's only applicable for like a smaller farm. As farms start to get even 80, 100 cows, the volume of milk that means, it's, I mean, to build a processing facility for that, you're talking.
That's only for the energy. So
Oh, the
when we're
energy.
talking about, yeah, when we're talking about processing otherwise, processing is kind of weird. So we can pay for the processor, but and like, let's say if the milk's delivered to the processor, we can't pay for that delivery too. But if it's getting delivered back for any kind of value added purposes later, we can pay for that delivery back once it's processed.
So yeah, with on-farm energy development, yeah, that's always helpful. And we just put in some solar on our farm and got a REAP grant, which was helpful. So I think that's all helpful. And you've got to have money. So we had to take a lot of money out of our own pocket to do that. So to look ahead, and I don't know that a lot of farms are in a position that they can do that.
You broke up for just a second, Heath. What were you needing to take money?
There's still a lot of out-of-pocket money that we had to invest to do that. So I'm not sure that every farm is in a position where they can even do that.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Bradley.
Thank you. So I guess I have a couple thoughts related to what folks are saying. As a technical assistance provider, trying to think about what the barriers are. I think one is just I love the idea of some kind of central resource so people know where they can find the kind of information that they need. And often I think people think of CEI as just a lender or just a business advisor and don't know about what, all the pieces of what we do. So I guess that's one. Two is I feel like what I've heard, and I think it was Andy yesterday who mentioned in the processing group, sort of a lack of technical assistance for really specific equipment knowledge, technical knowledge in terms of, and tell me if I was wrong in understanding that, but for folks who are, I think, Julie Marie, what you were saying about that scaling up, and it's not necessarily the, business assistance with scaling up. It's the technical understanding of the, dairy and equipment and handling and, so anyway, I'm jumping out of my lane a little bit there, but I think it's something that I've identified also with the sort of business planning assistance that CEI does, is this sort of deep assistance. We have so many folks who are coming through the proverbial door on a daily basis that, we sort of help someone and then we say, okay, go and work on this and then come back to us, right? But there's this, if someone is trying to write a grant for those amazing USDA rural development grants, they are super complicated and so CEI can help folks kind of get started and answer questions, and but I'm not sure that's enough. I think that there's like a lot of people are paying someone a lot of money to write those grants. So I think there's that sort of deeper technical assistance that I'm curious about, and I don't know how we accomplish it, so I'm not coming up with an answer, but I guess it's just something that I've been thinking about and wonder what other folks think.
Keep that question in your minds. Let me move to Ethan and yeah.
So I just had a comment that's kind of similar to what Bradley was saying. Looks like my video froze, but hopefully you can still hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Is now the time? I have sort of a comment on that same thing, or do you want to keep going around and maybe I should speak?
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay, so I think there's at least two subsections of what we're talking about, right? So like Heath just mentioned exactly the problem that I deal with when I'm working with a dairy farm that's 100 or 200 cows and is saying, okay, regular bulk milk production, which is what we think of as a regular dairy farm, one truck, one co-op backs up and takes all the milk. And they're thinking, I need to diversify. Should I make cheese? Should I make yogurt? Should I bottle my own milk? what they need help with is getting over that risk. And it's maybe similar to when a paper mill closes in Maine, and suddenly we have 300 people who are like, oh my gosh, where do I start? Like, I have skills to work in a paper mill, but there's not another paper mill, and we need like retraining. And so some of those we need like retraining assistants and technical assistants to help somebody that is Heath's farm size get over the idea of, this is going to be a big risk. I've never tried to do this before. I know how to do what I'm doing, but it's not working. Then the other big section that I get all the time is people who just moved here, or people who have always wanted to farm and maybe are changing careers, you know, and it's a beginning farm and they have no idea about anything. And that's a completely different subset, you know, like on one hand, they don't know what they don't know. So maybe they'll be more successful because they're going to figure it out. On the other hand, they don't know anything about even milking cows, never mind bottling it and so forth. And if Heath decides to start bottling milk, at least he knows how to produce milk. You know, he may not know a ton about putting it in a bottle, but he knows the milk part. So it's kind of like completely different subsets, and those people don't understand necessarily the difference. And as often as not, the people like Heath are like, well, I probably shouldn't ask for that help because maybe it doesn't apply to me. And the people who it doesn't apply to always ask for it and are looking for help and trying to get us to use grant funds or use, you know, so many hours in the day that I have to try and spread around to work on their project. So that's, sometimes we need to, I don't know what the best way to do that is. I bring this up at lots of different times when we talk, but just trying to figure out like, okay, are we targeting trying to keep the dairy farms that we have and make them more successful? Or are we trying to get more dairy farms here? And if we're trying to get more dairy farms here with technical assistance and help, is it getting dairy farms to move from other states, or is it getting people to start dairy farms from scratch? Those are really different goals to work on.
Sure. And I imagine that many of you may be thinking, yes, and, you know, there are going to be individuals in both of those categories. Let me turn to Ivana and then Lucia.
I just wanted to make a comment on some of our programs and the difficulty and kind of getting that technical assistance that Bradley mentioned. We try to emphasize this. I go to the ag trade show, I give 2 presentations on value added there. I go to all the ag fairs and try to talk to all the farmers that I can get to when I'm there. I think some of it is being scared to ask for that help. So I'm able to provide technical assistance on our grants up until 2 weeks prior to it being due. And I try to offer that to everyone and say, reach out to me. I can help you with your grant. I can help you as you write it. Let you know if something isn't enough, if you need to add more information here, what we're kind of looking for. So I think trying to get that word out, word of mouth, that's what we're here to do. They don't necessarily have to hire a grant writer. I can work with them on that grant. And to make another plug for value added, it is the worst grant we have. It is the most difficult grant we have. In the past, if it wasn't 200 pages, it was probably incomplete. But for this coming fiscal year, that program is all changing. We kind of got a little preview on there's going to be a new toolkit. It's all online. They like select things from drop downs, and it's going to be a whole different application process that should kind of remove that hurdle. I mean, there are some farmers I've worked with for 5 years before they actually put a grant in because it can be so daunting. And so this new process of applying for value added is hopefully going to remove that daunting, scary hurdle of writing a 200-page application. So
Great, thank you. Lucia.
Hi, thanks. I mean, I've been kind of listening and processing, trying to figure out where we fit in this space a little bit, but what Ethan said kind of resonated with me. I think from a loan program side, we do see those 2 groups, like the existing farms that want to do something different and the complete startups. And I guess maybe I just wanted to speak a little bit to, we have funding to help them. We can do both of those things. Sometimes what we see is, okay, now you would like to bottle and sell your own milk, but how do we help you verify that there's a market for that? And I guess we're not really sure, you know, where to send folks or how they assemble the information that we can look at and say, yes, this seems viable, right? We can put together numbers and lend based on that income stream, right? Mm-hmm. How do we validate that demand exists, or that if you produce it, someone will buy it? and at what prices? Those are some of the questions we ask. And, you know, we can work with certain commodity prices for some things. We can say, well, milk, you know, we can predict we'll sell at X if you sell it in bulk. But, you know, when we get outside of that, it can be hard for us evaluating a business plan to determine what's reasonable. I don't know if that's helpful in this space, but I could see a need or a, you know, a place for someone to help work with farms on that. And then the startup, I mean, it's one thing if you want to sell to a commercial dairy and you have an agreement with that, because again, we can work with the milk prices. But if we have an individual that wants to produce milk, but then, you know, put that into value-added products, it becomes the same question, right? If you haven't done business before, where is the support for your market?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm hearing that's a real gap. And that there is general agreement on that. Am I understanding that correctly? Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I think maybe some of it is the follow through, you know, like there's so many things out there, but how do technical assistance providers or ag service providers help with the follow through? And I was speaking with somebody who recently moved here from Vermont, and they had mentioned that there was kind of this like team of people that it was like a resource network, right? It's like Extension, NRCS, FSA, and there's this model in Vermont where like this kind of group of people work really well together and they can kind of help piece some of it, but they're constantly in discussion and talking together. So then they're trying to best meet the needs of the people that they're servicing. And we have a state livestock team, which incorporates a lot of these organizations. And we're trying to start that back up again. It obviously is livestock, but we do have a dairy focus in that group as well. And I think that's maybe where the gap is, like helping the farmer to get to the end of, you know, that grant. You know, I mentioned in my state livestock team that for a lot of these grants, they need letters of intent from ag service providers. So I told, you know, all of the members on that team, like, please be on the lookout, or can you be a resource where I can send a farmer that's applying for a grant? Because they need, you know, for a grant application, a lot of times for the grant to be successful, they need technical assistance. And a letter of intent is just saying, hey, I'll provide this for this grant to make sure that I'm supporting this farm and the success of this project. And so I guess maybe there's a lot, but there needs to be some more, I think, together planning from the technical service providers to help the farmers succeed in all of this. I don't know, that's my thought. And then I did drop, so Maine Extension has a Maine New Farmers course, and it may not be only specific to dairy, but it has so many good resources in it, and it's a team of instructors from Maine Extension, and they do have that follow through. So it's a course that happens along the course of a year, and so there's that constant, you know, circling back, checking in, that I think is what maybe is missing. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Glenda. Ethan, go ahead.
The first thing I was going to say is I do sort of profit team meetings with a lot of the dairy farms that I work with. And Glenda, we should talk. That would be a time when if those, you know, maybe you don't come to every single meeting that I do, but once a year or something, that might be an awesome time to get together and just sort of brainstorm the different things that farms have going on and what might be available that I'm forgetting about and that kind of thing. And the second thing I was going to say, I forgot.
Okay. So I think part of what we've talked about are that there are existing programs that are not being tapped into as fully as they could be for a variety of reasons. And I'll grab you in just a second, Heath. But I'm also hearing that there is a category of needs that are just simply not being met, that there isn't any entity or funding source for that. I'm also hearing a greater opportunity for coordination that may, without additional resources, make increase effectiveness anyway. Not that it would be sufficient unto itself, but so I think we're kind of getting into three, overall categories of issues here. Heath, let me grab you. You're muted.
There we go. So for one thing, I just wanted to comment, Bradley said something quite a ways back about like assistance with grants. And I just want to say, like with the REAP grant, we were working with revision, and without those folks basically writing the grant. And I don't know that I ever would have got through that. And I was even fed up with the fact that like every day they need this, they need that. And I was just collecting stuff. I wasn't writing the grant, and that was daunting in itself. So I that's definitely a need that farmers would have. The second thing, and Ethan just kind of jogged my memory when he was talking about having profit meetings with a lot of his farms. So many farms, I think, Ethan's working with farms that are looking at that different things. But so many of our dairy farms don't have that opportunity to have that third party come in and say, us as dairy farmers, we like to critique each other. And so many times we say, why is that person doing this or that? But if that person could have, a lot of these dairy farmers, if they had that person come in and say, you're doing something over here that is making absolutely no sense whatsoever. You should do this or you should do that. But, the funding, I think for, a lot of farms to hire Ethan's organization to come in and do that is daunting. So, I think that's an opening that I think could help a lot of dairy farmers too. But that was just something I thought of when Ethan spoke. So.
Let me grab Ethan and then you, Miriam. Ethan, I saw your note in the chat. Did you want to address something else?
Yeah, sure. It was also a ways back. Thanks for the plug, Heath. But also the specific technical assistance, right? Like one of the things that's a little bit tough, I think business acumen, when we talk about estate planning and transfer, like a lot of that fits with different things, right? But part of the reason that some of the value added stuff has a potential upside is that it's going to be hard to do. There's a lot of risk to figure out, right? So and I'm not saying this is what the person was complaining about that you were talking about in the other breakout meeting, not outbreak meeting. That would be bad. But if you say, geez, I want to make blue cheese because I know that I can sell a lot of blue cheese in Maine and could make $1 million on it, but it's not fair that there isn't an expert on how to make blue cheese here in Maine. It's like, well, we can't cover all of those things, right? We're going to have to pick some generalized things, and maybe some of it is going to be technical assistance for processing and putting together stainless steel equipment for processing that would be applicable to bottling milk, doing cheese, doing yogurt, whatever. But some of those real specific things, like there's a reason it's hard to do it and nobody else is doing it and nobody is capitalizing on it. And we can't necessarily solve all of those things. But
sure. Thanks, Miriam.
Yeah, I think one quick question I have is that if coordination feels like one of the easier things to access of that list, the better coordination amongst service providers. But it seems like there have been efforts to coordinate. And so I guess the question is, why have those efforts not felt successful or ended up falling apart?
I do think we've had so much turnover in the last couple of years. So I think that's a piece of it. Not only, so I'm like, I've been here less than 3 years. But many of the other partner organizations are in a similar situation where their staff is new. And it just takes a while to build relationships, to kind of know your customers, find out what the needs are, etc. But then it takes a leader for that coordination effort to continue. And for example, for me to take that on, it's fine to do, but then it becomes a balancing act of trying to learn at the same time, you know, it's the you know, building the plane as I'm flying it type of situation. And I feel that has been some of it. So this like state livestock meeting, for example, where trying to start and continue on some of those efforts. It's not dairy specific, it's livestock, but again, it encompasses some of that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Bradley, I think you were next.
I think actually Ethan had his hand up first. Ethan, do you want to respond to that? Okay. I'm really interested in this idea of coordination, and I think Glenda, in some ways, that it really is that relationship piece because I think I'm part of a lot of just sort of group meetings where people talk about what they're doing, and then and there is use to that, and even just sort of seeing each other's faces regularly. But I also think that it feels like there's a piece missing, and I wonder if having specific groups could be useful, like a dairy specific group. And I guess you're talking about a livestock specific, and maybe there's some overlap in certain. I think that there's a place for maybe sort of business planning and financial services, you know, for us to coordinate and then somehow overlap with dairy. I'm not sure exactly, but I think I've been wondering if we get more specific with those networks, there might be some more rich conversation. And anyway.
Great, thank you. Ethan.
Yeah, so I was just, when Glenda was speaking, I feel the same way, and I just wonder, and Jody, maybe you can help us with this. How can we help with this, and what should our recommendation be? Can we promote or recommend more funding to Glenda to help get this off? Does there need to be 2 dairy extension specialists in Maine so that we can do this? And Glenda, I think you're right. It's been some turnover, and some of the people who you came in and took over for had a ton of networks, and so some of the stuff that they had done in the past was a lot more efficient for them. And first you have to create the network and then start the program. And so it's, you know, we're in a time of changeover here, and what can we do to help it? Can we have any effect on whether the university hires 2 dairy specialists? Do we, you know, something like that? I don't know.
Right. Well, here's my thought, is that I don't think at this subgroup level is the time to censor ourselves. So if what you all are collectively hearing, you know, and decide and concluding is that, you know, in order to have better coordination amongst a variety of different service providers, that cooperative extension is the logical, you know, go-to place, then, you know, let's develop a recommendation that says the what that's needed and the who that you're suggesting. This then goes back to the full task force for further conversation, and with additional voices, there may be a broader conversation that says, you know, knowing what we do about UMaine funding, you know, that's not going to work, but clearly the need exists. So we've got to come up with a recommendation that solves the problem, if not that way. So what I was going to do, and I'll definitely turn to you in a moment, Keith, is maybe in about 10 or 15 minutes, I'm actually going to suggest that we take, and after we give an opportunity for the public to provide comment, is that we take, you know, a 4-minute silence break here and have each of you think about, if you were tackling this particular coordination issue, how would you craft a recommendation? And let's just kind of share those and see what we come to as specific a recommendation as possible. Let me grab you, Heath, and then I do want to open this up for public feedback.
Just, you know, around the university staffing issue, if we had never heard of PFAS, the amount of work the university could do would be way greater now. And I'm not being critical, but I know that came up in the AgCom meeting the other day. It's like and it has to be done. I mean, we are in that situation, but that staff at the university level is tied up with PFAS. And so, I mean, we can't really get ahead when we're looking behind. So that was just
hard.
Yeah.
I want to basically provide two opportunities for public input here because because we've got knowledgeable people listening in and want you all to benefit from their ideas as well. So if those of you on the line who are public members would like to provide comment, please just raise your hand and we'll take you now, and we can take you later as well. Representative Kluger, go right ahead.
Thank you. I just was going to say one comment when it comes to university positions. Is the Board of Agriculture is actively engaged in that conversation currently, and is very much the place I think where we should continue to have that conversation to try to encourage them to increase their budget around dairy and how that they can provide more technical assistance that direction.
Great. Just taking notes here. Yes, thank you, Jenny. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I really appreciate all the thoughtfulness and mindfulness that's going into all of this conversation. When I'm listening to it, I hear a lot of it is directed specifically at producers. And while that's incredibly important, I think it's important also to look at the challenges that are facing producers. And a lot of those sometimes are beyond the producer's control because they affect the value chain and the stakeholders. And one of the other issues, and it has come up, but it hasn't been named, but that is attrition. And if you have someone who is aging on a farm and they are dealing with the fact that there is no one necessarily in their immediate circle that they're looking to transition to, the task of planning transition is very difficult, and you will need a business plan to make sure that it is done. And I think so attrition and profitability and the stakeholder community are all parts and things that need focus. And I think that what's important, and the challenges have been laid out here and spoken sort of quietly and understated, is that there isn't really a culture of seeking technical assistance, being prepared for technical assistance, being ready or being willing to deal with it, or even having the time for technical assistance. And I speak of this because I know how I feel. And I know people have expertise, and I know it's hard for me to schedule them. And if you're on this call, I'm sorry, we keep putting you off every 5 minutes, Ethan. Anyways, but I think that approaches that build and encourage and empower a culture that is not averse to seeking assistance and is prepared to do the lifts required. He spoke really, really well about it. It's like if you're constantly being asked for stuff and you're trying to do 2 other jobs, it is hard. But if we are able to create a community of producers who are knowledgeable and have some sort of experience of what to expect, because that's generally the biggest hurdle, is if you don't know what to expect, it's really hard to invest in planning for that. And I think it comes down to knowing where your business stands and treating your farm as a business, which so many of us aren't really good at doing because it is a family thing. And I think that starts with like the cost of production study and equipping folks to be able to participate in the cost of reduction so that not only the data is there, but they also have that knowledge on their farms and are able to make business decisions or learn how to evaluate the information that they're providing. And also programs or finding and identifying costs that can't be recovered through our pricing formulas, especially if you're not diversified and have a separate income stream. And seeking out programs and technical assistance that address those issues, whether it be energy diversity or being able to recoup costs from generating energy. And I think I think we need to also look, is there a way to support the folks that are making sure our dairy products and our inputs get to us, that their infrastructure is supported? I know it doesn't seem like it's touching us, but if you can't get grain and you can't get it in a way that is under your costs and need because the railroad is under cared for, or they have to invest in their siding, that's part of the problem. Or if you have milk haulers that cannot find CDL drivers, those sorts of things I think are all part of what we need on our farm. And it's not money in our pocket, but it gives us the opportunity to put money in our pocket. And I just wanted to add that. Thank you again for the opportunity of allowing people like me to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I'm inclined to not want to lose this thread because we have gone down this road of coordination for a while, to give you all, you know, a 3-4 minute break to just put pen to paper. And if you had to write a recommendation that was as concise as possible that addressed this issue, you know, what would you do? Because that's where we need to land. And once we do that, we can, you know, then move on to some topics that we have covered to some degree, but not in as much depth as this. So I'll stop talking and I'll pick you all back up at 11:02 in 4 minutes and ask for some people to offer up their ideas. Isn't group silence very awkward? We all know we're here, but it can take, feels like 4 minutes feels like forever. Hopefully that gave you some time to get something down. Would anybody like to offer up their idea? I have faith in all of you.
I have something. Oh, I couldn't find the raise hand thing, but I've just found it. This is Alice. Alice from NRCS. I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're looking for, and I'm a little bit sort of on the outside of this discussion because what you call technical assistance is heavy towards like the grant writing, the processing, the business end, and I'm more familiar with the kind of technical aspects. But what I get off the top of my head, if this is at all useful, is that if there's some type of a central location or group or whatever, or individuals that are there and knowledgeable about all the different opportunities, what if there was an electronic tool where the producer provides input, answers questions, and then the tool generates like a path forward? What are the steps to take? What are the resources to access? And wading through their specific needs. And then however this is set up, you know, whether there's an office or whether it's directed somewhere to the university or wherever, there are people that can then assist with it. But the tool provides sort of a general, this is the type of producer, or this is what we're interested in. And then they get led down the proper direction to get specific assistance.
Right. No, exactly. And we do know that a resource of that kind does exist in, I think it's New York, unless I'm confusing it with Vermont. So it's certainly a model that is being implemented in some locations. Thank you for that as a starting point. Others, either to build on that or to offer up another complementary idea. Miriam.
Sounds like if we want to house this at extension, and part of the problem is turnover, in order to prevent turnover causing 100% loss of institutional knowledge, having a second extension agent in dairy seems pretty crucial if we want to uphold any of these other sort of resource aggregation ideas.
Yeah, thank you for that. Very straightforward. others before we move on? Ethan?
Yeah, so just quick, I was thinking exactly what Miriam just said, but maybe we just need to be creative about it. What about a temporary position? What about a public and private funding for somebody at UMaine for 5 years? You know, we've done Farm Credit has helped fund a forestry professional or forestry economist. I don't remember the name of the chair, but there was some kind of chair that Farm Credit helped with at one point, and maybe there would be others that would be willing to do something like that. And then I think we should collaborate with other regional schools. If we collaborated with UNH, for example, I went to school there, but so I'm a little bit partial, but they still have a regular serious dairy program and a dairy herd there. So they might collaborate with us and help us do some technical assistance if we could get them some funding, and it would be good for them to attract more majors, you know, more kids from Maine to go to UNH, which is probably the closest dairy major around, you know, that kind of thing. Like maybe it would work well for everybody. And maybe we could get somebody to commit to it if we said, hey, let's give it 5 years and see what happens. See if it really helps the industry, that kind of thing.
I really like that, Ethan. And so I put it in the chat. I'm working on this heifer and calf project with UNH already. I work with them quite a bit because we're only two people. So there are two dairy specialists, but the new dairy specialist in a similar role like me is very new. We have our expertise skills, and so we kind of help each other to cover all of the areas that we or I guess we try to cover all of them. So I absolutely love that. And we've been finding that there maybe could exist like a New England so there is a tri-state dairy, so UVM, UNH, and I work closely together on a lot of things. But there is capacity to maybe do more specific technical assistance. Maybe it is for accessing funds, but maybe it is looking at, you know, long-term profitability, and that person works with dairy farms across all of these states and has maybe more of a tailored expertise to business succession planning, etc. And then I don't want to lose the train of thought that Jenny mentioned, because I thought that was really important, talking about like the culture. And so maybe in these efforts, it is organizing like farmer network meetings in each county where if interested dairy farmers can come out and just have a space to talk to somebody in a group or on a one-on-one basis, maybe drop-in hours. I don't know, but I really liked what Jenny had mentioned about that. And if we can promote some of that organically, maybe folks will be more eager to reach out and get TA assistance. I don't know.
Well, and I think just to play on that a tiny bit more, I think that's completely known that the way to do that is start with kids, right? Like that's why McDonald's has play, place, and Happy Meals. That you hook them as a kid and they're there for life. So if we can hook some of these people with UNH or with some programs when they're a little bit younger, they'll make friends, you know, and some of that structure is gone. People used to meet each other at the Farm Bureau Young Farmers and then continue to talk to each other about stuff, or they were in FFA together, or they were showing cows in 4-H. And a lot of that stuff has waned around the state. The other thing that I was thinking about maybe pitching it as a 5-year thing and then evaluate it is we might get somebody who is like thinking that they're going to retire and think, well, maybe I could do 5 more years and show up there, and you get somebody experienced rather than somebody who's, you know, at this point in Maine, we're going to be looking for somebody who's young and looking for a huge opportunity, which also means like maybe it's going to be a huge challenge, right?
Absolutely.
Huge
No,
opportunity
I
and
agree.
huge challenge
Yeah.
are the same. And if you sort of capped it at 5 years, it might be like somebody like, oh, I'd go do that for 5 years if they're not counting on me to turn around everything in the whole state and region, you know, just a thought.
Right.
Sure. This is great. Okay. Well, I'm inclined, let me just do one last ask. Is there anyone else who had crafted something that overlaps with this, but took a slightly different angle? Because there's no one right here, and just getting other threads of thought that could potentially be woven in could be helpful. Okay. All right, well, one thought, but this conversation can go wherever you all think it would be most productive for it to go. We've talked about this coordinating piece, how do we make better use of existing resources or add some additional resources like Humane Cooperative Extension. There was a whole other category of brief conversation that we briefly touched on at the beginning, and that was existing funding programs that may be structured, either may need to be tweaked because they're not meeting a particular need, or they are well structured, but they're insufficiently funded. And so since this is really the funding / technical assistance subgroup, I wanted to make sure we gave some airtime to the issue of funding. And many of you on the line can speak more knowledgeably about funding sources for these programs than I, and particularly Miriam, I'll look to you. But for the dairy, for DIF and for AMLF, as I understand it, one of those programs has a very narrow funding source, maybe both, that has to do with 0.5% of the slot revenue from the Oxford Casino. And there has been some conversation at the task force meetings in, the broader task force meetings about that's a very narrow funding source. And are there other funding ideas for programs that actually, were they better funded, could be serving a really helpful need? So I did want to just raise that as a general topic, not with necessarily a specific program in mind, but I'll just throw that out about funding sources in general.
Hey, this is Jackie Perkins. I'm currently driving, so I apologize. I'm not gonna turn my camera on. It's not a funding source, but I see the trickle down effect of needing to fund the cost of production for dairy farms. Because not only do they need to know, the farmers need to know, but it affects so many other programs within our state. So I'm just gonna put a plug in for that. Thanks.
Just want to make sure we all heard you correctly, because you're a little bit far away. Just wanting to ensure sufficient funding for a cost of production study. Was that what was that what you were saying?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And there was some conversation about that at one of the first task force meetings, and about trying to identify some innovative ideas were raised about ensuring that happened. Heath, go ahead.
I would just piggyback on that a little bit before going on to my point, but I mean, it is in statute that study is done. So at this point, it really has to be done per statute. It's just a matter of, does the Milk Commission have the proceeds to get that done or not, which they always have one way or the other. But so my point is a little bit away from funding sources, and it's the tier program, even though the study required $6 or asked for $6.55 average to make every farmer break even, short run break even. We didn't get that, of course, this year. And it was significantly less than that, but that's a floor that farmers can count on. So I want to make the point that the tier program as it exists is very important, because farmers can count on that floor. Folks at FSA or Farm Credit or CEI all can bank on the fact that farmer won't be paid less than that floor. So that I mean, no other state in the United States has that. So it's a very positive program. I would love to see it fully funded, which wouldn't put farms profitable, but it would put them all at a break-even point. But I just wanted to make that point before we go any further.
For sure. And I can assure you that that was central to the conversation at the tier program subgroup meeting. There will be a recommendation of that sort coming out for sure. I'm wondering, Julie Marie, if I could put you on the spot briefly about just given your history in understanding the revenue draw from the casino, whether you see opportunities for expanding that in some way, in some creative way.
So the tier, I'm going to give just a little background so everybody has some perspective. The tier program is funded in kind of a unique way, in that every other program in state government is required to set a firm amount, and that gets voted on the budget, and that's the amount. The tier program has language that says however much money the tier program needs in a given fiscal year, that money shall be transferred over. So it's kind of funky, and it makes the budget writers a little squirrely, because it's predicting milk prices, which is a very difficult task. So back when the Oxford Casino was looking to go through a referendum process to get authorized, we were talking about dairy funding for the tier program at the time. And so this 1% of the slots revenue at the Oxford Casino was offered to the dairy farmers as part of the package that was put forward as to get people to support the Oxford Casino. So so we kind of got sucked in, and the way it works is however much money the tier program needs in any given month, we have to use up the Oxford Casino money first, which averages about 30,000 a month, between 30 and 40,000 a month. And then only after that do we draw from the general fund. So because of that, we now have a linkage to what's referred as the cascade, which is a way of describing for any gambling enterprise the list of programs and entities that receive funding as a result of that activity. We have had quite a bit of gambling activity, new gambling activity since that point. So we've got, now we've got Bangor Casino, we've got the Oxford, we had off-track betting before. We now have sports betting, online sports betting, and we have, there was another category that escapes me right now, but so there's been a big expansion in that. So one of the things that was tossed around is the possibility of requesting that the legislature tap into that again for the tier program in some ways. The challenge becomes anybody who's already getting money through their prospective cascade isn't going to want to give it up. So, I mean, this really becomes a political football within the legislative, political context about, prioritizing is, we'd have to go in and say that the tier program is more important than whatever the other programs might be. And they include K through 12 education and nutrition and, health initiatives and all that stuff. So that's a little kind of background on those things. There was a fair amount of discussion at the tier subcommittee talking about this and talking about in general, the category of sin taxes to which we can add marijuana now to alcohol and tobacco and those types of things. And the fact that those are some of the fastest growing sectors of economic activity in the state. And whether or not we want to tap in, again, that becomes a legislative policy and budgetary question. But I mean, that's the other way that people were looking. There is another piece of funding, though it is not tied to the tier program, and specifically cannot be tied to the tier program, but there is already, the state already assesses a milk handling fee on every gallon of milk that is sold or moved within the state of Maine. That money goes directly into the general fund. It is not dedicated to the tier program or any other program. It just goes into the general fund. It has to be that way because of certain court decisions that influence how funds cannot be dedicated to go out in a program like the tier. So, but that's just another piece of the, if you will, the milk money puzzle that we have in the state.
Yep, thank you. Thank you. So I want to go back to I guess then maybe if the identification of specific new or expanded funding sources is not the most constructive use of time right now, I am wondering about a conversation that started early on in this meeting around, you know, particular categories of needs around transition planning or business planning. Would it be helpful to spend any time talking about ways in which to better meet particular TA needs beyond this coordination idea that we covered in some depth? Sit with that question for a moment while I take Bradley's comment.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a comment on identifying financial needs. And I think one of the things that came up yesterday at the processing meeting was this idea of the sort of value added and creating something unique. And Ethan was talking about how risky and expensive that is. And that's often why people don't want to do that. And so I guess I just would say, I don't know if this is an appropriate place to sort of talk about the agriculture, food and forestry investment fund, but I think that that is a potential pot of money that could help dairy farmers to do some of those risky investments that it takes to get the to try something new and try some of the value added products. And so it is, the fund exists, but it hasn't been funded yet. So I guess I think of that as a potential resource. So I just wanted to mention that. And
for sure. For sure. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it will likely make sense for there to be a recommendation coming out of this task force that specifically addresses the Ag, Food and Forest Products Infrastructure Investment Fund. Exactly what shape that takes is up to the task force, obviously, but you're right, it is a mechanism that exists and needs to be capitalized. So just my previous question around whether, go ahead, Heath.
I just wanted to kind of add on to what Bradley said, and I know you brought it up in your kind of synopsis of our task force that we'd had previously, but I think it's important to bring up again that many of these farms need additions to their already existing infrastructure and not technically something new. Many farms are not profitable because their facilities are aging or their equipment is aging. And a lot of those don't align with the grant programs that are available for processing or this, that. And maybe it's just the fact that the roof is falling off the barn, or the stalls need to be replaced, or things that don't line up with existing grants.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Good. Miriam, go ahead.
I know that we had talked about some other examples of what states have done to support that kind of investment, including tax refunds and breaks. And I'm wondering if a grant is the preferred mode of accessing that kind of financial assistance for just like mitigating and remediating what upkeep is needed over time, or if there are other ideas of, should that be a grant, should that be a loan, should that be a tax rebate that doesn't maybe cover all of the funds, but is money you don't have to apply for necessarily, etc.
Ethan, I'm going to hold your comment for a moment if others want to respond to Miriam's question. And is Julie Marie yours? Yeah, go ahead, Julie Marie, and then I'll grab you, Ethan.
There is a history that at one time the state had received, I think it was a $2 million grant, and it's what kicked off the MeChap program, but which is the Maine Cattle Health Assurance Program. The initial activity that they did was every farm could get funding for, and I forget piece of equipment, but it was a fairly standardized piece of equipment. They would pay for it, and then they would just file for reimbursement from the MeChap fund. And that was open to every farmer, automatically. They just had to file the paperwork after the fact, with the goal of kind of bringing everybody up to a level of replacement. And maybe that's a possibility if that were put forward. I would recommend that there be a category, not just a singular piece of equipment, but a couple of variations, because there are some farms who may have already done that upgrade and are need to do something else. So but that is a format that was used before. Those monies happen to have been federal monies that were passed through, and so we had to comply with USDA's requirements. But if we were to do state monies, then we'd have a stronger hand in being able to coordinate what those funds could be applied towards.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Ethan.
Yeah, sorry for the background noise. I've switched to my car. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, totally.
Okay, so I had a couple of things going through my mind related to everything that people have just talked about. Back to sort of siloing or thinking about divisions of how we help. Right now, the tier program is designed to help dairy farmers be competitive and profitable, although I know we have said that it's not enough to be profitable, but it's designed to help farmers in Maine that have a higher cost of production for various reasons. Maybe where it's because feed tends to cost more because we're at the end of the line as far as transportation. Maybe it's that our growing season is a little bit shorter. So we have decided to make an investment in dairy in Maine to keep it here, to make it profitable for people to stay here in dairy, right? But another thing that we've talked about that Keith mentioned, Heath was talking about, we have some farms that, they may need money for a roof on their barn, but they don't want to put on-farm processing it, right? So that other division would be, okay, there is some farms that want to change up what they're doing. They want to change the story of their farm and willing to diversify and so forth. So that's sort of like, could be a different pot of money. And the tier program isn't necessarily helping with that, unless they have regular dairy operations as well. And then the third part would be beginning farmers, right? So we sort of have, in my mind, three different things that we could help with. The tier program is in place and does pretty good, but maybe could be improved for the existing farmers. And then maybe there's some other things that ought to go along with that, right? So if we do, okay, yeah, anybody who has a roof that needs to be fixed, we'll pay for half of it or something like that. But so then I've mentioned this before, and some of the ways that we can help that doesn't involve quite as much funding is maybe more guarantee programs. And I mentioned like FAME does some guarantees, FSA does some guarantees, and maybe I'm just partial to that because I work for a bank. It allows the banks to still do the underwriting and the work on some of that stuff, but have something to fall back on. So maybe we can take a little more risk on stuff. So maybe it allows us to take a little more risk, but it doesn't necessarily help them make the payments. Right. You know, if they say, I want to build a $2 million parlor because my parlor is worn out and old and it'll make me more efficient, and we're not sure, we may not lend them the money if we're not sure they can make the payments back. But if FSA guarantees it, well, maybe that gets us over the hump. We lend them the money, but it doesn't help them with the payments if they're not able to be more efficient and so forth. So that just a couple of other things to think about on how some of the stuff works now that maybe could be improved or changed or tweaked.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Amanda?
Yes, I'm not sure if this is the kind of ideas you're looking for, but I've been hemming and hawing about this for a few minutes now and just wanted to throw this out there. Years ago, we implemented a program called the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Farmers program, and that was geared to blueberry growers and lobstermen. And the intent of the program was to help them kind of be prepared to deal with market fluctuations, typically primarily resulting from import-export issues. So the way this program worked is it was two phases. The first phase was a training phase where we had them come in and we provided them training on ways to improve their business structure. And for each phase, we provided a direct payment. The first direct payment for phase one, which was the training phase, that direct payment was, a smaller amount. And the way I see that you could utilize something like this, your training could be working one-on-one with service providers, or even just having service providers come in and present what they have to offer for services. And then phase two was they actually sat with a business consultant and worked to create a business plan. And once they had that business plan in place, we provided them another direct payment. And this was a more substantial sum. The business plan could be, and this is touching on some of the things people have said, the business plan could be ways to improve their current business, or it could be ways to diversify their business, which was really encouraged, the diversification piece. And with that direct payment, they could take that money and use it to improve their infrastructure, replace that roof, numerous things. They could even we allowed them to use it for whatever they wanted to. It didn't have to necessarily go right back into their business. It could pay a grain bill or whatever they needed it for. But this was a way to, someone mentioned, if we're going to have them work with technical service providers, there needs to be value there. This is that extra motivation, I think. It would give them the extra motivation to work with those technical service providers. And by giving them a direct payment to do so, it would just increase the value for them. It would give them more incentive to do it. I don't know if you have funds to work with, but this is a clear plan and a way to utilize funds to, help them improve their business plan and work with the technical service providers. And I don't think the direct payments, I can look back. I think we implemented this program in like 2009. So it's been quite a few years ago, but I can tell you what those direct payments looked like then. Of course, that wouldn't probably match up with what you'd need to provide now, but just a thought.
Awesome. Yeah, no, very helpful. Thank you, Amanda. Miriam.
I'm just gonna piggyback off a little bit of what yeah, Julie Marie just added that comment, that is a very similar model to the current Farms for the Future program in Maine. And I think that does sort of raise the question of, in looking back at Farms for the Future applicants and who's received it over the past few years, I am seeing that there's sort of maybe one or two dairies, but really haven't seen a ton of dairies in all of the applications as a kind of proportion of who are pulling from. And I'm wondering if some of that has to do with the limitations of phase 2, that the cash grant is limited to $25,000 and the loan is similar to DIF, limited to $250,000 at 2%. So I'm wondering if there are ways that Farms for the Future could be more useful to dairies, or if it feels like that's just kind of on the side and more or less useful. But
yeah, no, I think that's a really important question. Heath, did you have a, no? Yeah, do others have a perspective on that? I mean, it is obviously a very, very similar model and seems to tie very important technical proficiency expectations to cash awards. And does anybody have a perspective on how to further capitalize on this program? Julie Marie.
I just put a note in the chat. What's the possibility that one of the recommendations might be to add another position and another pot of funds to the Farms for the Future program that is specifically geared to dairy? And Miriam responded in the chat that it'd be tough to do for this year. So this, just because of the timing of budgetary process and political process. But if we put it as a recommendation to the legislature, then we're kind of kicking it into a different group that has a different timetable and different opportunities. They can do with it as they will.
I'm not sure that's the way I read Miriam's response. Miriam, do you want to go ahead?
yeah, I think I more mean that I would be concerned about shaping it in a way that leaves money that is only for dairies, because we right now are not getting that many applications from dairies. So I think that it would be probably more beneficial to focus on how can we add potentially a second line to the type of funding that you can get from Farms for the Future, and just see if it is useful to dairies before we consider creating a second pot of funds. Because I think otherwise there's a good chance that money gets left on the table until it's well designed to be helpful to dairies.
Can you just say a tiny bit more about that, Miriam? Create a second, did you say line?
So potentially the limit for anybody but a dairy remains $25,000. But if you're a dairy of X size, then maybe we can say that the limits are different, and that we can change the caps for specifically dairies or something along those lines, that there's sort of a dairy specific rules within the program, but not a secondary program. I think that's also, I know we don't want to limit ourselves to what we think is feasible, but at the same time, I think if we want to get any of these recommendations done, I think that is much more likely.
And do we know, back to your original question, do we know that the reason why this program is not being well tapped into by dairy farmers is the thresholds are too low? We don't know.
I can say that the loans are 2% instead of 1% for DIF, and we already have discussed that $250,000 feels like a small cap for DIF. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that those are two pretty critical issues with the program. I don't know how phase 1 comes into it, or if that's differently useful to dairies. I would be curious to know if anybody has thoughts on that. And phase one is up to $6,000 for business planning, investigating new ideas. It's a little bit wibbly, but it isn't quite the investment, but deciding what investment might make sense.
Okay. Yeah, and I do wonder, just sort of anecdotally, whether surveying dairy farmers specifically about what are the primary reasons that they're not utilizing that program, just so that we know for sure before modifying it, could be helpful. I don't want to belabor our conversation longer than it needs to be, but I want to make sure that we have at least touched on the topic, the general topics that I flagged at the beginning. So I just want to run through a couple of them quickly again. Support for transition planning, succession planning, support for grant application development, and I know that many of these items could feasibly be covered by some of the topics that we already discussed, but if there's anything specific that it would make sense to draw out. Miriam, go ahead.
I think the other thing that I was thinking about in conjunction of coordination and thinking about grant application accessibility and just how difficult and murky they can be, is that might be an important focus of that coordination is developing best management for how to write grant applications that are less difficult to fill out, developing lists of the kinds of information that all of our programs across this broad network tend to need for different kinds of grant and financial programs, making sure that service providers in any one organization knows about the structure and application process for grants and other financial programs in any other organizations. We can answer questions for one another and provide support across the board. So I think that might be a helpful way to make those grant applications more accessible without having to dive into additional, more specific TA like grant writing.
Right. Yeah. Well, one thought I have, I want to give the public one more opportunity to offer any other final perspectives here. One thought is that between Miriam first and myself involved, we start to make sense of the notes that we've taken and try to synthesize them into some overarching ideas, recommendations to bring back to this group in a couple of weeks for your second and final meeting. This process went fast. And our goal is to have draft recommendations from each of the subgroups completed by September 19th. We need time to actually coalesce what we heard today. And so I am wondering about the end of the week after next, around the 12th, or the 16th for a second meeting, knowing that we've got a hard stop for recommendation development by the 19th, and we need to give ourselves a couple days to pull it all together. Miriam, I'm going to first look to you because I know that you're doing some heavy lifting in terms of notes development. Is it realistic to try to schedule a meeting as early as the 12th?
I believe so. I can make time to make sure that the notes are done by the 10th, if that's a fine enough turnaround.
Yeah.
I will say, between the 12th and the 16th. I am only available on the 12th. I am
Yeah.
out for 13 and 16.
Okay. What does the 12th look like for, and I know we're not going to get everybody, so maybe a show of hands just in the chat for a meeting on the 12th. And I'm going to suggest some blocks of time because, well, no, I'll just leave it open. If you want to put availability in the chat, or yeah, just if you're pretty open, just a thumbs up. I'm looking at a lot of yeses. Great. Okay, I think we should do that then. And let me look at some times. 12 is preferred. And Miriam, what about any constraints on the 12th for you?
Let me double check. I think I should be pretty much clear except for 2 to 3, but that's, if it has to be moved, can be moved.
If we did 12 to 2, would that work for most folks? All right, I'm gonna say 12 to 2. Unless, let's see, I'm just gonna 12 to 1.
I believe in the chat it, so Julie suggested 10 to 12.
Yeah, I have a conflict.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, not at all.
I thought.
No, I was hoping I could do that, but okay. Then let's do 12 to 2. Others can do 12 to 1. All right, hold on. Let me just, what about 11:30 to 1:30? Helps for folks. Okay, all right, let's do that. 11:30 to 1:30 on the 12th of September, which is a Thursday. We will get let's see, am I going to have the email addresses of all of you who, Tom, are you, you have the email addresses of everybody who's on this call. Is that accurate from registering or checking in, or no?
No, we get names, but not necessarily email, but we can probably track them down.
Okay. All right. I'm going to put the onus on us for that, unless actually, you know what would be helpful, because we're going to save the chat. For anyone who was specifically, invited to this meeting, just plop your email address in the chat. Sometimes these obvious things to me are not so obvious, but I think that works. And we'll get the invite out to all of you for that time period. Before we sign off, let me go back to public members and see if there are additional things that you'd like to add. Okay. All right, then we will have notes to you hopefully by a day in advance. We'll get them to you by the 11th. They're not going to be super long, so I think you'll have plenty of time to digest them, and they'll be the starting point for our conversation of, yeah, we sort of got it right. That's the basis of the recommendation. We need to flesh it out more, that sort of thing. I think it will give us a good launching off point. Any other ideas before we let you all go? Okay, thank you so much. Super, super helpful. and you have a great afternoon.